morning. Welcome to Chess News. Today I want to take a look that was played yesterday in Bilbao during the final of the Chess Masters, the so-called Grand Slam, between Ivanchuk and Anand with white against Ivanchuk with black. Now this game ended in a draw, but I thought it was a very nice and instructive game in which I think Ivanchuk somewhere missed the win. I hope to point that out to you. And I think it would also be nice to take a look at this Marshall a little bit more in depth. You know, the opening they've been exploring now for so many years, and a lot of top players play it at the top level, such as Aronian is playing it. He's really world-class expert. Svitler is playing it. Who's not playing it? Leiko is playing it. Ivanchuk is playing it because Ivanchuk plays everything, of course. And apologies to all those strong guys out there. And also the lesser gods who play the Marshall. Okay, so I want to run through the opening moves rather quickly because, you know, it's about 16, 17 or maybe even more moves of mainline theory here in the Marshall. Now, I just want to point out to you that at this moment, when black plays castles, he is signaling that he wants to play the Marshall, or else he would have played d7, d6. And at this moment, white can also choose to play a so-called anti-Marshall, either with a4, or with d3, or with h3. But Anand invites the Marshall and plays the normal theoretical move, c3. So now d5, which is the typical Marshall move, of course, introducing the gambit, because now white can win the pawn on e5 thanks to the opened e file. So now there is an exchange, and the old move used to be knight f6, which Marshall played against Capablanca in the premiere of this opening. The knight on d5 is attacked, of course, 2 times. But nowadays, or should I say nowadays, they play c6 to protect the knight and keep it in the center like that. So d4, and now of course we can see white's kingside is deprived of all sorts of defenders. So black starts an initiative on that side. First he chases away the rook. Bishop d6, rook e1, queen h4, already threatening to crash through on h2. But white can defend against that, slightly weakening his, or slightly, should I say seriously weakening his white squares. So that's the compensation that black has in these kinds of positions, you know, just sitting on the white squares, and of course his better development. So white now hastens to finish his own development, and here comes another assault on the white squares. Queen d3, rook a e8, applying pressure over the e file. Note that the rook on e1 is undefended, but white just develops, connects his rook, and now rook e6. The idea to either double rooks on the e file, or sometimes play a timely rook h6. Applying some more pressure to the h pawn. So that explains queen f1, you know. White is really starting to feel the heat, and he is chasing away now black's queen. Queen h5, it's still there, but in a less menacing position, you could say. And now, yeah, this is probably one of the most well-known theoretical positions of modern chess. They've been playing many moves here, and I suppose that a4 is kind of the main move. But since the Marshall has a high drawing tendency, they've been trying a number of other moves here, and one of the latest tries is what Anand also plays, f3. Now this is an amazing move when you look at it at first, because the bishop on e3 is left en prise like this. Also this pawn here comes under severe pressure, maybe it could be taken. And what would happen then? Actually, this move has been played in at least 2 games before last year on the top level. I want to take a small excursion to these 2 games. The first is Kramnik-Aronian, which Kramnik managed to win. And it also started with f3. And I suppose one of the strategical points is that you relinquish the extra pawn, in this case the pawn on f3, but in exchange you get some kind of exchanges of the pieces, which means that black has less pressure on the king side, and then black's queen side could turn out to be weak, and also white has a majority there. So this is a more strategical way of playing. And Anand does not manage in this game, but Kramnik did manage, because well, that had to do really with some other nuances. Let's have a look at that. So knight e3 was played in that game, and now it is very important that you have this in-between move, queen f2, which leaves the knight on e3, the bishop on g4, and the rook on e6 en prise. So white is going to regain some material here. Knight d5 was played by Aronian in that game, and now f takes g4, regaining the piece, but losing the extra pawn because of queen takes g4. Now Kramnik played queen f3, offering an exchange of queens. And of course, if the queens were exchanged, there would be no pressure at all left on white's weakened king side, and white would have a move like a2, a4 at his disposal, trying for some initiative, I think some serious initiative actually, on the queen side against black's weakened pawns over there. So that explains why Aronian played queen g5, protecting his knight on d5 also. He could have also tried queen g5, because I don't think it is possible to take the knight on d5 immediately, or at least to win the pawn there. You can take the knight, of course, and after c takes d5 it would not be advisable to play queen takes d5 because of bishop g3. And I think that black at least has a draw. But after c takes d5, maybe you could try knight b3. The idea is that you put the knight on c5, attack the pawn on a6 and the rook on e6, and if black exchanges the knight, which he probably will have to do in the near future, because usually you cannot live with such a knight, which is so strong and guarded by a support point, then white can recapture d takes c5 and start applying some pressure on the weak d pawn. So that would be a nice strategical plan, I suppose, for white in this position. So back to the Kramnik-Aronian game, where after queen f3, Aronian played queen g5, and for the moment overprotecting his knight. Okay. Kramnik now played rook e6, weakening black's pawn structure. But now he's faced with an attack on his queen and his knight. But he solves that with a counter-attack, knight e4, attacking, of course, here the queen and the bishop, so it's all very tactical. But there still remains the attack of the rook on the queen, of course. So now Aronian retreated the queen to g6, and Kramnik must now safeguard his own queen, and he did so in playing queen e3. So nice, interesting tactical skirmishes there. And now Aronian neglected the attack on his bishop. I suppose he could have moved his bishop out of the way, you know, maybe to c7 or e7, something like that. But he continued on a more aggressive path with knight f4, which is possible, of course, because of the pin along the g file, again attacking the white queen. And I suppose that this must have all been home preparation by Kramnik. He now plays queen c2. So the queen is now guarded again, out of harm's way. It's also protected by the bishop on b3, which means that the knight can play again, and still there is a threat to the bishop on d3. And furthermore, this move sets a very devilish trap. And, well, Aronian just simply falls for it. And, yeah, can we excuse him for this? I think the tactics are really very difficult to calculate. He thought that he could play on with knight h3, but actually this is a mistake, leading to a more or less winning position for white. Now usually it is very dangerous to embark on such attacks when you have a piece en prise, you know, and surely Aronian must have realized that king g2 also protects the knight on h3, so now you have two pieces en prise. And he was probably hoping or putting his trust in queen g4, which is what he played. But white now has two strong moves. And yeah, Kramnik simply chooses one of them. One move that looks good is just to simply take the bishop. Because after knight f4 check, white has the rather amazing king f2. After all the other king moves, you can try and check that out for yourself. White really, black really has a very strong attack. But after king f2, which is maybe what Aronian missed, there is just not enough attacking power because of all the specific tactics in the position. I looked at this. For instance, knight e2, but after knight f5, very nice desperado from white. White is very slowly consolidating his positional plus like this. Now after king e1, there is a threat to the pawn on e6 and the knight on e2. Black can still defend himself by removing the knight from harm's way and protecting the pawn on e6 and still making use of the fact that the G file is pinned, so it were, because if you take here, then of course queen G1 follows. But white has a very strong centralizing move here, queen E4. And still black has some move with which he can play on rook F6. But after rook D1, which protects the rook, puts the rook on a protected square, he is really starting to threaten to take the knight now. So in this position, white has a significant edge, I think. Okay. But after queen g4, Kramnik chose another route, leading to a more or less winning position. He played here the amazing, well, at least to my eyes, bishop e6. And it is still based on the idea, of course, that there is also a knight on h3 and a bishop on d6 en prise. So why not just do some magics, you know? You can you can do these things. So of course now the queen is attacked, and black is the first to be a piece up in this position. But since the queen, I think that's the best way to explain it, since the queen is the protector of both the knight and the bishop, can you see which move Kramnik played here, eliminating that queen, leaving both pieces en prise, regaining one of them, and starting an offensive on the queen side, already being a pawn up. So I will give you 5 seconds, pause the video if you like, I will count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Kramnik played here the very strong queen b3, simply eliminating the defender of both like pieces, and also attacking this defender at the same time. So after queen takes b3, a takes b3, there would be an open a file, and white would recapture one of the pieces. So Aronian tried knight f4 check, and Kramnik simply took that one. The idea of this desperado is of course that now there is a weak pawn on the f file, which maybe black can regain. But now he felt obliged to play queen takes f3, but after a takes b3, bishop takes f4, the bishop was still en prise, can you imagine, and rook takes a6. Kramnik had reached a more or less winning position. You should remember this, if you're playing against the marshal, if you manage to crash through like this over the a file into black's queen side and attack his weak pawns, then usually you have a winning position. and the attack continues, because it seems that black only has a very passive move here, something like rook c8 or rook e8, you know, just trying to protect the position. So with precise play, and white also sometimes has king f3, attacking the bishop. Maybe first he should protect his h2 pawn. This is a very good position for white. Okay, so this was some history about the f3 move. There was one other game that I wanted to show you very quickly. It was played also last year, 2007, between Yakovenko and Zwittler, but that ended in a draw. In that game, Zwittler had played rook f6, which is also very interesting, of course, putting pressure on this bold f-pawn. And Yakovenko had continued bishop d1, usually not a very nice move to have to play. And Zwittler started applying some extra pressure, rook e8. Now the rook on e8 is unprotected, so bishop f4 attacks the rook on e8, but after rook takes e1, and rook e6, Zwittler equalized rather easily. So that explains why after f3 in the game from yesterday, Anand after rook f6, which was also Ivanchuk's choice, he tried something new. I think it was new, at least. He played here queen e2. Now I don't know if we will see this new move repeated, because as mentioned earlier, Anand doesn't really reach any kind of advantage here. If anything, it's black who is better here. So now Ivanchuk regains the pawn here, but in order to do so he has to give up his white squared bishop, like this. Knight takes f3 and rook takes f3, but we can still see that there's, you know, some pieces hovering around white's king here. So, and also there is of course an attack on the bishop on e3. So black still maintains some measure of initiative, which means that Anand has to play very careful here. Now if you try to play bishop f2, just moving the bishop which was attacked, then black has a very strong move, knight f4. It's always this knight f4 move, you know, just seeking access to these black squares. Because after g takes f4 and bishop f4, white is in trouble. Of course black for the moment has sacrificed a piece, but his king is under heavy pressure. And if you try to prevent h2, protect h2 with a move like bishop g3, you're losing, because with bishop takes g3, h takes g3, rook g3, and mate will follow, or you will have to give the queen. So that explains why after bishop f4, probably the better move is to try and make the queen protect h2 by means of bishop e3. But then of course bishop takes e3 simply regains the piece, and after king h1 and a5, with the idea of playing a5, a4, conquering the square on d5 and applying some very serious pressure on the long diagonal, black simply has a very strong initiative. Also, I think after rook f3, was there another option here? Yeah, another option maybe could be to try and counterattack with bishop d1. But then also bishop g3 is very strong. And now if you take the rook, then queen h2 is winning. King f1 and just recapturing the rook here. Because after king e1, black's final piece comes into the attack with rook e8, regaining the piece. And just look at this armada of connected passed pawns here, and not to mention the fact that white's king is still very much under serious pressure. So that explains why after rook f3 Anand did not enjoy his white squares for a long time, because he had to give it up against his very strong threatening knight on d5. So he played bishop d5 here. Now queen takes d5 was played, And now he played bishop f2. Bishop d2 is also worth some consideration. Maybe it is a little bit better even to play bishop d2, because that keeps an eye on the h6 square, from where black's rook will start to become active. On the other hand, bishop f2 also has a point, because it protects the weakness on g3. Okay. Now the rook on f3 is a bit clumsy now. It has done its duty and it is attacked by white's queen. So Ivanchuk now retreats it to f6, and from there it can go to either e6, or g6 or h6 and apply further pressure. So in this position, I think that black's position is already a little bit more fun to play than white's. It has to do with the fact that there is sitting a sore thumb out here, and black can try to attack that with h5, h4, etc, etc. So white must try and do something, but the plan that he chooses looks a little bit too slow to my taste. I think a normal move would have been to play a4, trying to get some counter initiative going on the queen side. Instead, he plays b3. Now there is an idea to this move, because it takes away the c4 square from black's queen, which means that white is kind of threatening queen e4, the positional threat. And then if black were forced to exchange queens, then white has his plan on the queen side, etc, etc. And if black would, for instance, retreat the queen to h5, then white would be attacking the weak pawn on c6. Now maybe he couldn't take it because of the discovered attack with bishop g3, but at least white would be kicking, in this position. So that is the idea of b3. But black can quite easily counter that idea with removing his queen from the d5 square and putting it on f2, attacking the bishop on f2, which means that the queen has to stay here to safeguard the bishop. Okay, now Anand played here rook a d1. Another idea maybe would have been to play rook c1 to push c4, and then I don't know, maybe recapture with the rook and again have some pressure on this weakness here against c6, but he played rook a d1. And here comes Ivanchuk, smoking out white's king h5. So rook d3 now. We can see Anand's idea. He just puts it on the third rank, the rook, and on the e file with rook e3. So he is, of course, applying tremendous pressure down the e file. But it seems less relevant because there are no entry points here, for white's heavy pieces. Probably the most important aspect is that it is now also protecting the g3 vulnerability. Now g6 comes, attacking the pawn for the third time, but at the moment is also 3 times protected. And again, Anand plays a little bit careless and slow here, to my opinion, even though he still is within the boundaries of the draw, probably. Anyway, queen f3 looks like the safest move, but after rook g6 he plays here c4. Ivanchuk plays h takes g3, and now not bishop takes g3 because of the very strong queen d7, and black is threatening a very strong thrust with f7, f5, f4, harassing white's pieces. So after h takes g3, h takes g3 was played, but we can see that this has become a really very poor pawn now. And Ivanchuk now continues playing on the queen side. He had an interesting option with bishop b4, attacking the rook. Let's say rook d1 here, for instance. Rook e5 counter-attacking rook h3 is very nasty, still attacking the rook and also threatening an attack on the h file. So after bishop b4, rook d1 probably, and then queen h3 with the same idea of rook h6, I suppose. and queen f1. This was another way to play, and it's a little bit like cat and mouse, you know. Black is the cat, of course, and white is the mouse in these kinds of positions. So a small edge in this position also for black. Anyway, after h takes g3, he played b takes c4, and b takes c4 was played. And this also makes sense, because if we look at white's pawns, they're all really quite weak. Now black also has some weaknesses here, but it is more difficult for white to get at them, because he also has to protect his queen side. So black can now combine attacks on the g3 pawn and white's king with attacks on the, let's say, the a2 and the c4 pawns, for instance. But after b takes c4, I think that Ivanchuk didn't play the strongest move here. He could have played again something like bishop b4, and now not rook b1 because of queen takes b1, but rather rook d1, and still after queen h3, it's still cat and mouse, you know, and the time trouble is approaching. I think this would be a nice position to play for black, and difficult for white in time trouble. But instead of that, he played c5 here, and I'm a little bit surprised, because Anand now had the opportunity to play d5, which he didn't play, by the way. But if we look at this, we can see now that white has given himself a protected passed pawn. This pawn has become a little bit weak. It's now sitting on the diagonal of the white bishop. So it would seem that white's bishop is also getting an attacking function, not only a defending function. It also means that, let me remove these colors for now, it also means that black no longer has the c5 square for his own bishop available, and must sit here, kind of sit here, to try and prevent this guy from breaking out, you know, as Nimzowitsch would say. So, furthermore, black's route along the fifth rank against the queen side is also blocked. So, I am not so sure, unless there is a very specific tactic, which there isn't, that this is not the best move by Ivanchuk. Anyway, after c5, Anand didn't play d5. I think he was not in his usual form yesterday, and maybe also in quite serious time trouble already. He played here queen f3, which is quite good given the circumstances, because he could have made a mistake with d takes c5, which would allow black's bishop on the strong diagonal there. And then after rook f3, attacking both queen and bishop, and queen c8, an exchange would lead to a black advantage, you know. Still, this guy is very weak, and this guy is under attack immediately, and this guy is weak, and yeah, black has some switches. Maybe he can somehow bring the other rook into the game also. He also has this switch, and for the moment he is attacking the king. So this is a very nice position for black, maybe not winning, but certainly in time trouble very nice to play, I would say. So queen f3, of course. Now it would be quite good for white to exchange queens. Let's have a look at that. Ivanchuk didn't play like this, but queen f3, rook f3, c takes d4, rook e4, trying to regain the pawn, of course, f5, rook takes d4, f4, king g2. I think this is more a draw than it would be a win for black. So that explains, of course, why after queen f3, Ivanchuk started or continued with the cat and mouse, so to say, queen h3 like this. And again, d5 would have been possible, but queen g2 was played by Anand, and now queen d7 was played. Again, d5 would have been possible, but now Anand played an inaccuracy. He played here d takes c5, and something similar happened as we saw in the earlier line just now. Because after bishop c5, black is reaching this position with the weak pawns on c4 and a2 within his close reach also. So of course this attacks the rook on e3. Rook e4 was now played. By the way, this does protect the pawn on c4 for the moment, but loses some protection from the g3 pawn. Queen c7 was played here. This puts some pressure on g3, so bishop takes c5. I'm not sure if that would be wise for white to play. Anyway, king h2 was played. Some extra protection to the g3 pawn. And some cat and mouse here by Ivanchuk. And now bringing it back to f6 with tempo. Attacking the bishop once again. And it seems that Anand is now making a decisive mistake in time trouble. The best move probably here was to play bishop c5, after queen c5, rook 1 e3, and after a move like rook d8, which threatens to come to the first rank, you have queen e2 protecting that square. But in this position, Anand does not exchange immediately on c5. He plays bishop e3. But this just simply seems to slow and lose a tempo compared to the line we just saw. Because now Ivanchuk plays the very strong rook d8. And we can see the difference that after a move like king h2, which was played in the game, and bishop takes e3, in this case white cannot recapture with his e1 rook to keep the c4 pawn protected because of rook h6 check, king g1, and the black rook is already there, you know, rook d1 immediate check. In the previous line there was a queen on e2, which would have safeguarded white from the check on d1, but this position is of course winning for black. White is in a very nasty grip here on the king side. So back to this strong move by Ivanchuk, rook d8, king h2, and after bishop e3, rook 4 e3 was necessary to keep this guy protecting the first rank. But of course now the pawn on c4 is en prise. Rook h6 check was played first, king g1, and now Ivanchuk's 40th move. He could have taken the pawn on c4, and I really don't know why he didn't do that. Maybe he was still in the rush of time trouble and he thought, well, let's not go for material, but let's go for some pinning action here. So he played queen c5. And this is also still a strong move, which forced Anand to play queen f2, the first move after the time trouble. And now Ivanchuk started thinking for a very, very long time. I think he thought for about maybe 25 minutes for his next move. Well, actually, when they're thinking so long, it's not a move they're thinking about. They're thinking about a general plan, you know, trying out some forced lines to reach certain endgame positions that they can then judge either to be winning or to be drawing, something like that. Still, queen takes c4 came very much into consideration, just being a very healthy pawn up, of course. But first he played here queen h5, threatening a mate on h1, with the idea of queen g2 protecting the mate, and now rook d2. Now, of course, you cannot take the rook on d2, because then queen h1, king f2, rook h2 would be checkmate. But you can play here rook e8 check, king h7, and then play rook a e2, just protecting the queen from the attack on the rook, like this. But now there followed a cat and mouse check again, and queen f2 was forced in this line. And it seems that Ivanchuk now again misses the strongest opportunity. He could have played here rook d4, 2 times attacking the pawn on c4, and after a move like rook e4, again threaten mate with queen h5, and then after queen g2 play rook d1, still keeping a very strong cat and mouse position. But in this position after queen f2 he exchanged rooks, and that somehow relinquishes the pressure a little bit. Rook e2, and now probably Anand makes a mistake, even though it is very hard to judge. I think that his best possible try would have been to go here for the queen versus double rook ending with rook takes e1 check and king g2. Of course the rooks work together very good, and if they can be piled up against either this pawn or this pawn, you know, maybe just something like that along the 6th rank, at least this pawn would not be able to advance. But it's not so easy to see what his general plan would be, because if he has to defend against the c pawn, then how is he going to win the a pawn or the g pawn? I mean, these guys are world top grandmasters, and maybe they can see an idea. Maybe we can think of it also, but yeah, for now it just seems that Black has to protect the 6th rank, and he also has some weaknesses here and here, you know, and this king can sometimes be checked also, so not very simple technical task. Anyway, maybe Anand just trusted Ivanchuk on getting something out of this position, and after rook takes e2 did not go for this specific endgame, but rather went for rook e2. But now, again, Ivanchuk has a very strong position, and he takes the pawn on c4 now. Okay, it took him a few moves, but now he really is a pawn up, and of course these guys are still very much weak, and this guy is still in danger, whereas Black's king is somewhat more safe. Now he got a check with queen f5, but of course g6 is a very nice move to play. Just note that the f7 pawn is protected by Black's queen, very nice. And Anand now played queen e4, and probably this should have been the last and decisive mistake in the game, because of course it connects the heavy pieces, and it offers an exchange of queens, which would leave a very drawish rook endgame, of course, but it fails to protect the pawns in the right way. I think that a better try after g6 would have been queen c2. And excuse me. Okay, here's to your health. And we will see why. At least from c2, the queen is also protecting the a2 pawn. Now you may ask, why is that of any importance? Well, we shall see that shortly. g6 was played, and then queen e4. And now Ivanchuk misses the win. I don't know why. Well, I suppose he was already rather tired, of course, and there's just so many ideas that you have to look at. But let's consider the position. How would you talk yourself to the win if you are a chess player in this position? Well, there's a few things to note. First of all, you've got to keep the queens on the board because you have attacking chances against this king. Second of all, there are for the moment enough defenders for White's king position, and since you're playing Anand, you really cannot hope just to simply mate the white king or just to simply win the rook or the queen in this position. So if you're a real chess player, you have to be modest. You have to start looking for some other things to attack, and we can see that this guy here is weak and this guy here is also weak. So, and we are already a pawn up. So if we can win a second pawn, then surely within a few moves we could make Anand resign his position, right? So let's try and hit the opponent where he is weakest. We're not going to mate him, we're not going to win the queen or the rook, but maybe we're going to win one of these weak pawns. Now what about that? So, if we think about that, we can also think about a place where to put the queen, since we're not going to exchange it, from where it hits both weak pawns. Now, I mean, mathematically speaking, there are several squares possible, but from this position, and let me remove the colors for a moment, from this position, it would seem a very nice idea to put the queen on a3. But you say, okay, so on a3, yeah, sure, I'm attacking the g3 pawn, but white can simply defend it maybe with a move such as king g2, you know, and the a3 pawn is already, or the a2 pawn is already protected here by the a2 pawn. But what about a possibility to try and attack both pawns at a moment when they are not defended? Because if I attack them at a certain moment when they're both undefended, then it would be a real double attack. Now, Ivanchuk could have managed this position with a very strong queen c1 check, because the only move in this position is rook e1. If not rook e1, but for instance king f2, then this would be winning. Very strong position. And if not king f2, but rather king g2, let me add that, then this is a very strong position, winning for black immediately. So that explains why rook e1 is the only move. So Anand will not lose his rook, but he will need his rook to protect against the unsafe king. And now, can you see black's move? Yes, of course. Queen a3, hitting both weaknesses. Now there is one move still with which you can protect both weaknesses, and that is queen g2. But after the cat and mouse check, queen c5, where king f1 is the only move, which is quite easy to see, because after queen f2 there would be rook h1 winning immediately. So king f1 would be forced then, but then rook h5 crawls out from his hideout and threatens a very strong check on f5. So you would have to, you know, defend against that, probably with g4, but then after queen c4, another very nasty check, forcing king g1 probably, and rook h4. You're again not attacking the king or the rook or the queen, but this weakness on g4. So white can still somehow kick with rook e4, but after queen c5 check, king f1, f5, black really is winning. Note that g takes f5 is not possible because of queen takes f5 check and double attacking the rook on e4. So this would have been the winning line for Ivanchuk. And maybe he saw queen c1 but he didn't saw the rest, or maybe he just didn't see queen c1 and then the follow-up queen a3. Because I'm sure if he would have seen this follow-up queen a3, he would have realized, you know, even without calculating the rest of the lies, that this was the way to go about it. Because there's just too much pull in the position for black. Usually if a player sees and feels something like this, he will go for it, you know, just trusting to the position to show the next moves. Okay, so that was the win after queen e4 in my humble opinion. However, in this case it was not Anand but Ivanchuk giving away very important tempo with queen c5. And now he no longer has to check on c1. Because now Anand just played king g2, of course, and there is no double attack anymore. The g3 pawn is also already protected in advance, and it's not necessary to force the rook to e1 in this position. And since he had been thinking about his cat and mouse game for so long, I think he was down about half an hour on the clock. So they started playing the remaining moves, and of course he's still a pawn up, but there's probably just not enough initiative anymore for a clear win. And with so many minutes on the clock, they played a few more moves, and Black was pushed back a little bit, like this, you know. Anand was also starting to play, and yeah, Ivanchuk is quite in time here to protect his f7 pawn, but he does so with the rook. The rook is now no longer on the king side, it's a bit more passive, and Anand now had a check, and after this check, f6, a5, g5, queen d5, and queen b5, with, I don't know, maybe just a minute or less on the clock, Ivanchuk proposed a draw here, which was accepted by Anand. Well, so, and with that we come to the end of a long video analysis. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think it was quite educational, or at least I hope it was. Some interesting points in the opening and other things to show you guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please, until next time. Bye.